Hey everyone, it's Matt here with Nightrun Studio, and in this mini-series, we're creating a player progression system. Ultimately, this system will allow the player to customize progression by leveling up attributes. These attributes will create unique stats combinations that affect actual gameplay. We'll show how to increase attack damage, spell power, healing efficacy, and even max health. And we'll do it all with the aim of giving you elite level control of progression while using clean code without overcomplicating things. In this first video, I'll show how I'm setting up my UI elements. Yours doesn't have to look like mine, but using a similar setup will make the series easier to follow. Alright then, let's get started. Now although we'll eventually be wiring this into existing systems like our health script and combat script, all you really need to get started is an empty scene. I'm just going to begin by right-clicking in the hierarchy, going to UI, and I'm going to create a new canvas, which I'm going to call Player Progression. Now anytime you're adding a new canvas to your scene, you want to open up the scaler and generally make sure that it scales with screen size. If you click on Game View, you can see your current setup. You'll notice I'm in Full HD, 1920 by 1080. Those are the reference values we'll want to use. Now the only other thing we want to do while we're here is add a canvas group. We won't use this just yet, but eventually it'll give us the ability to turn on and off every child of this object with a single component, and also toggle their interactability and whether they're blocking raycasts. So this will become quite handy as we progress. With that done, let's right-click on our player progression, go to UI, and we're going to add an image, and this is going to be our attributes menu. You can double-click on that to zoom out and see it in the context of your entire UI panel. And if I go back up to the player progression, you can see how the canvas group works by turning the elf off and the object disappears. Alright, for now let's just stretch this out and imagine that it's actually a panel. And before we go any further, I'm just going to show you the UI pack I'm going to be using for this. This one is by Edahoshi. It's free for commercial use, and it's just a really fun fantasy UI pack. You can download this one for free, though I recommend also taking a moment to follow the artist and maybe leave a comment to let them know how much you appreciate their hard work. Once you've dropped those assets into your project, you can navigate to the UI folder. And here I'm just going to click on my attributes menu, and on image where it's looking for the sprite, I'm going to find the rectangle box. Though as usual when we first import something, it's not looking quite right. Here I'm going to actually just edit all of these assets at once. I'm then just going to set them all to be 32 pixels per unit. I'll apply those changes, which for now won't really do a whole lot. I'm also going to go to point no filter, which when we apply will sharpen things up quite nicely. And then for format 32-bit, which will just clean up some of the discoloration that happens by using the higher quality format. Anytime we're working with UI boxes with outlines, we generally want to edit those sprites. You can grab the little green nodes on the outside here, and you want to drag them in to catch all of the outside box as well as its shading. What this does is it actually creates 9 separate boxes, so we call this 9 slicing. And it's going to make it so that when we scale this box, say horizontally to make it extra wide, it doesn't stretch the pixels. All right, let's apply those changes. Now when I click on my attributes menu, I can head down here and change from simple to sliced, and you'll notice right away that it changed the outside. And here we can play with our pixel per unit multiplier to make them as big or little as we want, but now the pixels along the outside will always retain their square nature rather than stretching. Next, let's open up our rect transform, and I'm just going to zero out the position for the X and Y, and then I'll punch in some values. I'm going to use 750 by 950, which will nicely fill up the middle of the screen. Now that we've got the base for our menu, we can start adding the different components, and I'm going to start with the title. So let's right click, we'll go to UI, Image, I'm going to call this one Title here, and for the sprite we're actually just going to use the title box. I'll then head up top here where I'm going to click on the rect transform and hold down Option or Alt on PC to make sure that we set its position so that it's anchored right in the top middle. At this point, I'm just going to give it a slight negative value so it kind of pops up and overlaps, and then set some width and height values. You'll notice when we zoom in here that we are getting a little bit of stretching. Some of the pixels are not perfectly square, and that's because this one is not yet sliced. So just like we did before, let's open the sprite editor, move those green nodes to encompass all of the shadows and the outside, and then apply those changes. Now when we change our image type to sliced, we'll have pixels that are perfectly square and that also are the same size as those on the outer shape. All right, let's add the title itself now, so we can right click, add a UI text mesh pro object. We'll head into our rect transform where we can stretch in all directions. I'm going to type in attributes here and set up so we're using the Bangers font. I'll be working with size 64, and I'll just center that in here, and I'm also just going to pick a color that kind of matches the brown on the outside of the menu. And then I'll head down to outline and just give it a bit of a white. You can also add an underlay here if you like. I like to have a little bit of shadow, and you'll notice mine's already preset to show a little shadow. That said, I want mine to be more on the bottom, not the top, so I'll move my Y offset to negative. And there we go, just a little bit of a shadow. Our next panel will be the points that we have available to spend on attributes, and I'm just going to create an empty game object for this, as it's going to have a few different little parts to it. I'll just give this some width and height values and move it into place up near the top. Next up, we want to add some text, but let's not reinvent the wheel. We can just copy the text we just created and make sure that it's a child here. For clarity, we'll give it a name. I'll call this available text, and here I'm just going to type in available points. Now currently it's still anchored to the old title parent, so I'm just going to re-anchor it here, except this one we don't actually want to stretch it. I want it to anchor towards the left middle, so I'll use Option or Alt and make sure that it anchors over that way. I'll set this to a slightly smaller size and make sure that it's aligning toward the left, and then at this point we're ready to add some points in here. So let's right click, add a UI image this time. I'll name this one points, and we're just going to be using the black small circle box as a sprite here, which will just kind of create a little depression that we can put the actual number of points inside of. I'm just going to drag that one into place and resize it to about 120 by 120. At this point we can copy that available text, paste it in here and make sure that it's a child of available points, and then just rename it. I'm just going to put a placeholder 00 in here. We can make sure to expand it in all directions. I'll make sure to center the alignment, make it nice and large, and then you can just kind of tweak the margins a little bit to make sure that it's actually centering just the way you want it to. Alright, the next part's the most finicky at all, and that's where we're going to add our attribute slots. I'm going to begin by just creating an empty object here, which will be our attribute slot holder. And I'm just going to make this nice and big so it kind of fills up most of the empty space we've got left. Now, in order to make it easy for our code to modify these attributes down the road, we're going to give each attribute its own game object, and we'll let the code do the work of naming and setting up graphics and values. Let's create an empty object. I'll call this attribute slot, and for now we're just going to drag it out to roughly fill the space the slot will take up. Later we'll have a component that sizes it for us, so don't worry about getting this part just right. Now we will want each slot to say what stat it is, so let's copy that text from our title once more. I'll call this one stat name. Once again, I'll use the rect transform to set its position so that it expands within the parent, and then I'm just going to add some margins around the outside so that it appears in the middle. I wouldn't worry too much about getting this just right, as we will be resizing the whole slot in a little bit, and you can fine tune then. I'll then just call this one stamina as our first example of a stat. Now if I give everything this giant white look, it's really going to be kind of blinding, so I'd like to have a second style going on here. However, you'll notice that if I change the outline to black, it actually changes everything for this preset. So we're going to have to create a new preset here. In order to find our different presets, I'll click on the font asset, but it's not actually the asset itself that we're wanting to change here, it's the preset. So for that, I'm going to click on the Bangers SDF custom here and just duplicate it. I'll then rename this one with something descriptive like black outline. Now, when I click on that stat name text, we can go down to our material preset and choose that new one. Now, when I change the outline, it will only change the outline for anything using this preset. I'm then just going to give this a little thicker outline and do some other general things like make the font smaller. I'm going to align mine to the left top, and that looks good. At this point, I'm going to right click and add another UI image. This is going to be the icon holder. I'm just doing two images, one within the other, as this pack comes with a cool outline. So here for the sprite, I'm going to go into my UI folder and grab the black big circle. I'm going to press Option so that I can suck it up into the top corner for position, and then I'm just going to make this one a little larger as I want it to kind of overflow the slot sort of thing. So I'll give it about a 140 by 140. Now we can right click again and add another UI image. This will be the actual icon itself. If you open up the attribute icons, you'll see that there's a bunch of them here, so you can just pick one. That said, you'll notice they're sliced a little funny. So let's open the sprite editor, and again, right now it's auto-selected a size here. What we actually want to do is go to grid by cell size and make all of these on a 17 by 17 grid, and make sure there's no offset or padding. You can then slice that, apply those changes, and close the menu. Now we can click back on our icon, and for the sprite, I'm just going to use the first attribute here. Next, I want to create a sort of progress slider to show how much we've leveled up this thing. So I'm going to create an empty here and call it slider. First thing we're going to do here is stretch it in both directions, and then give it a little bit of a margin so that it actually lines up with our stamina words and leave some room at the end for the value. And I'll just give it a slightly negative Y value, that way it actually moves down below the name of the stat. At this point then we're going to add in a slider component, and then in order to get any further we need to actually add some elements here. So let's create a UI image. This first one is going to be the fill, and I'll use the value blue for this one. Again, we'll hold down Option to expand this in all directions. Then we'll click on the slider again, add another UI image, and we'll just call this one empty, as it's going to be what shows when the slider's not filling it. This one we're going to use the attribute bar, and we're going to expand this one also in all directions. Now you'll notice at this point that we have a little bit of an unpleasant overlap coming from our fill. If we just head over into our rect transform, we just want to add a little bit of a margin on the top and bottom, and that should clean that up pretty nicely. We can then go to our slider, make sure to drag the fill into the fill rect here, and now when we come down below, we should be able to slide this value and get it moving nicely. When we go to our fill, you'll notice that it actually changed our set from stretch in all directions to up and down, but that's exactly what we want. Next up, we just want to add an increase and decrease buttons that you can actually allot points. So I'll add a UI button here and call this first one decrease. Now the UI pack does have an increase decrease button for this, so I'm just going to click on that and open up the sprite editor. This one is set up with a 7:9 ratio for whatever reason. We can apply those changes. And then back in Unity, we can click on that decrease, and for the sprite, we can drag in the first one here. At the moment, it's semi-transparent and it looks funny and it's got words. Let's start by just deleting the text. I'm going to just set its position over on the left so that we get it in roughly the right place. Next, I'm just going to set it to a size of like 50 by 55, so it's roughly the right size. And the reason it's transparent right now is because on our player progression menu, our CanvasGroup currently has it set as uninteractable, which grays it out. If we set it interactable, you'll be able to see it again. Don't worry, our code will handle this later, so it's really not a big deal. At this point, I'll just get the button to be the size and in the position I want it to be. Then I'll go to my empty and just add a little bit of a margin so that it lines up perfectly. At this point, then we can click on our decrease button and duplicate it. We'll call this one increase. I'll then just grab the correct button sprite and drag it into the sprite slot. And at this point, we can just get that increase button and drag it into place at the end here. With that done, we've at last finished this slider and can close it up. The last thing here now is just to have some values so that we can see what our stamina is currently at. For this, I'm going to add a UI image. We'll call this one stat value, and then I'm going to grab the black small circle box as the image for this one so we get a nice little depression here. This time I'll just anchor it to the bottom right corner, and with that done, we're ready to add our text. Again, let's just duplicate some text from earlier. We'll use the stat name here, and make sure that we drag it so that it's a child. I'll rename it as value text, make sure that we set its position so that it stretches within. I'll put a 00 as our placeholder and then just center that again. We'll give this one a nice large text. I'll just fiddle with the margin so that it's exactly centered. And then I'm just going to go into my assets folder, find my prefabs, and drag the attributes slot in here. That way, as we duplicate these, and here I'm going to make 4 of them, any changes we make to one of them can be applied to all, which is going to make our life easier. At this point, I'll head to my attribute slot holder, and I'm just going to add a grid layout group, which will allow us to control the size and positioning of each of these slots. I'm going to set a cell size of about 600 by 130, and you'll notice that already that's spacing things out pretty nicely, though we'll also add a little bit of spacing in here. Now that we've got our final size, we can actually do the last fine-tuning to get all this spacing right. And I'm just going to start by clicking on the slider and just arrange it so that it sucks up a little closer to our text. And I'll just change the margins here so it's closer to our text and aligns perfectly at the left side. I'll then go to my stat value, where I'll just move it up a little bit so that it feels a little more centered, which I'll just anchor to the right side rather than the bottom, and that's looking better already. I'll then apply those changes to all of my other slots, and that's looking pretty good. Now the last component of our attributes menu is just going to be a button so that anytime we change our point totals, we can confirm that change. So let's add a UI button here called the confirm button. I'll set this at about 240 by 60, and then I'm just going to drag it down into the empty space at the bottom here. At this point, we can change up the sprite, and if I just type in button, I can actually find the button from our UI. We can just click the arrow on the confirm button to edit our text. I'll type in the word confirm here. I'll set my font asset to bangers, and for the material preset, we're going to use the black outline again here. That said, I'm going to use a lighter color so that it stands out a bit. We'll then make this one nice and large, and with that done, the menu's looking pretty good. Now, our attributes menu represents the place where the player has control over their progression. However, we actually need these to turn into some stats, so we're going to create our stats menu next. Good news is this one's going to go much quicker. Let's begin by adding a new UI image, and this one is going to be our stats menu. I'm just going to move this over to the side here. I'm going to add the rectangle box that we used for our attributes, and then I'll just modify our size and make a slight adjustment to the position. Now, fortunately, we don't have to create this menu from scratch. I'm just going to open up my attributes menu and we're going to copy our title. Let's make sure to make it a child. We're going to anchor this one and set its position to the top and then just give it a 0 on the Y so that it sort of intersects that top bar. Next, we'll just click on the text and change this one to be skills. All right, first component already completed. Now, we don't need to have an available points one, but we are going to have a sort of skills holder. So let's copy the attribute slot holder and paste it in here as well. Don't forget to make it a child. Now let's just begin by getting rid of the extra slots. And for the existing one, we're just going to go to prefab and unpack it. That way we can create a brand new slot, which has all the stuff from the attribute slot, but won't be explicitly linked to it. First of all, let's change our name. This is going to be the stats slot holder. And of course, we'll want to locate this in the right place. So let's expand in all directions. There we go. And then just set some margins so that it actually appears in the place that it should. Don't worry about the fact that it's going to be squished and funny looking for the moment, as we'll fix that. Now in our grid layout, let's just set it to 400 by 60 for now, which will roughly take up the space we want. And then let's actually create this slot. So first of all, this is going to be a stats slot now. It is going to need a name. That said, in my design, I'm not going to have an icon for these ones, so we can delete that altogether. I'm also going to delete the slider. Now for the name itself, let's actually just position and anchor it to the top left here. I'll then give it a little more space to work with, let's say about 240 by the full height of the slot. And then I'm just going to anchor it one more time to adjust it now that we've changed what's in there. All right, that's looking pretty good. I'm also going to make sure that this one is centered vertically so that it's right in the middle of the slot. All right, now we can actually delete the stat values. We just want to have text here, so I'm going to duplicate the stat name. This will represent the current value of whatever skill we're looking at. Since it's just going to hold a couple of digits, we don't need it to be quite as large. We'll give it a dummy value of 99, and I'm just going to drag it into place. Next, we want to have some text that can show up as a sort of preview to show us how any changed attributes is going to modify our skills. We'll call this one preview value. And for now, I'm just going to put it in brackets and do like a +4 as a dummy value. I'll just drag this one off to the side there. And actually, I don't want this to be left to chance that these show up in the right place. So let's head to our stats slot, and we're just going to add a horizontal layout group onto here. This just gives the parent control over where any child elements show up, and we actually don't need to change anything here. You'll just notice now that when I click on the different components of this slot, I actually can't move them. They're being held in place by this layout group. That's really all there is to this slot. Let's head to our prefabs folder, drag this in there so that if we make any changes in the future, we don't have to change them individually. I'll then duplicate, so we've got a few of these. You can make as many as you need. And then I'm just going to play with the spacing so that they fill the space up nicely. And if you've got more stats, you might want to have a little less spacing. All right, that actually does it. We've now got our attributes and skills all set up. And in the next video, we can actually start coding this. Hope to see you there. Until then, though, this is Matt with Nightrun Studio. Cheers.